Hi, everyone. I'm Diana Delgado, the Literary Director of the University of Arizona Poetry Center. And I want to welcome everyone to another episode of the Institute for Inquiry and Poetics, featuring ambassadors from our Art for Justice initiative. The Institute for Inquiry and Poetics, founded at the University of Arizona Poetry Center, is a thought center designed to create space and time for poets to respond to pressing questions that reside at the intersection of social concern and poetry. Encouraging interdisciplinary modalities and investigative research, the Institute will ask poets a series of questions and digitally archive their responses on poetry.arizona.edu, in addition to YouTube and the Center's archive Voca. Tonight, I'm excited and honored to host Nicole Sealey, Hanif Abdurraqib, and John Murillo as part of Art for Justice, a 3-year project that commissions new work from leading writers in conversation with the crisis of mass incarceration in the US, with the goal of creating new awareness and empathy through presentation and publication. I want to give a special thanks to TJ Hill at the UA, who is our producer, the Ford Foundation, and the entire team at the University of Arizona Poetry Center who make this reading possible. In our program tonight, we are hoping to encourage organic conversation about the process, craft of poetry, the ethics of mass incarceration, writing about it. In order to encourage that dialogue, we will have each poet read a poem and then have another poet respond to the work with the poem that they've created for the project. We are encouraging conversation between the poets as a means of deeper understanding in the many forms of impact that mass incarceration has on so many lives. Let me begin with introducing all of our 3 readers and their bios. Nicole Sealey. Nicole Sealey is the author of Ordinary Beasts, finalist for the PEN Open Book and Hurston Wright Legacy Awards, and The Animal After Whom Other Animals Are Named, winner of the Drinking Gourd Chapbook Poetry Prize. Her honors include a Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome, a Hodder Fellowship from Princeton University, the Stanley Kunitz Memorial Prize from the American Poetry Review, a Daniel Verjon Award from the New England Poetry Club, and a Poetry International Prize, grants from the Elizabeth George and Jerome Foundations, as well as fellowships from the Breadloaf Writers Conference, Canto Mundo, Cave Canem, MacDowell, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the Poetry Project. Nicole, you've been busy. Formerly the executive director at Cave Canem Foundation, she is a visiting professor at Boston University, City College of New York, and Syracuse University, and also teaches in New York University's low residency MFA Writers Workshop in Paris. Welcome, Nicole. Continuing with our program, we will also be hosting Hanif Abdurraqib, who is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. His poetry has been published in Muzzle, Vinyl, PEN America, and various other journals. His essays and music criticism have been published in The Fader, Pitchfork, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. His first full-length poetry collection, The Crown Ain't Worth Much, was released in June 2016 from Button Poetry. It was named a finalist for the Eric Hoffer Book Prize and was nominated for a Hurston Wright Legacy Award. With Big Lux, he released the limited edition chapbook, Vintage Sadness, in summer 2017. You can't get it anymore, and he's very sorry. So his first collection of essays, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, was released in winter 2017 by $2 Radio and was named a Book of the Year by BuzzFeed, Esquire, NPR, Oprah Magazine, Pace, CBC, the Los Angeles Review, Pitchfork, and the Chicago Tribune, among others. Amazing. He released Go Ahead in the Rain Notes to a Tribe Called Quest with University of Texas Press in February 2019. The book became a New York Times bestseller, was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize, and was longlisted for the National Book Award. His second collection of poems, A Fortune for Your Disaster, was released in 2019 by Tin House, and won the 2020 Lenore Marshall Prize. In 2021, he will release the book A Little Devil in America with Random House. He is a graduate of Beechcroft High School. Welcome, Hanif. John Murillo is up also. John Murillo is the author of the poetry collections Up Jump the Boogie, Cypher 2010, Four-Way 2020. Finalist for both the Kate Tufts Discovery Award and the PEN Open Book Award, and Contemporary American Poetry, forthcoming from Four-Way Books 2020. But that's out, you can get that now. His honors include a Pushcart Prize, the J. Howard and Barbara M.J. Wood Prize from the Poetry Foundation, and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown's Cave Canem Foundation, and the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in American Poetry Review, Plowshares, Poetry, Prairie Schooner, and Best American Poetry 2017, 2019, and 2020. He is an assistant professor of English at Wesleyan University and also teaches in the low residency MFA program at Sierra Nevada College. Welcome, John.
Hey.
Hey, great to see you all here. Thank you again, poets, for being here with me today. And I'm hoping, Nicole, if you can start us off, and then we'll have Hanif read, and then John, and we'll just continue in that rotation if that seems good.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Diana. And thank you to the University of Arizona Poetry Center. Thank you to Dwayne and Tyler Meyer, all the crew, and to co-readers. I'll first start by reading a couple excerpts from the Ferguson Report and Erasure. I'll read the Erasure first and then tell you a bit about it. Here goes. Pages 1 to 14, excerpt from the Ferguson Report and Erasure. We call out as in we neigh, part reflex, part reason, part particular urge. We are innocent as summer, as children in the park, as the short form of a name belted out by the bereaved, our living pending this single instance. Records show we attempted to make the most of our bones by controlling our bite, for which we are more likely to be found guilty. We could hear the impact and act written for the stage. We heard blood echoing, increasing in volume, increasing in reach. The forecast read, the city read, diminishing to the proportion of red. Whatever it will be, may be target practice. We pile into night like men at a bus stop. So those are a few pages from the Ferguson Report and Erasure. As we know, an erasure is a found poem, one created by erasing an existing document. That document being, for this project, the Ferguson Report, the Department of Justice's 100+ page report, investigative report on bias policing and court practices in Ferguson, Missouri. And the impetus for this report was the fatal shooting of Michael Brown, an unarmed 18-year-old Black man by a white police officer, Darren Wilson. And so that's what I'm erasing. And those are just two excerpts. I believe I said they were pages 1 to 14, but that's the pages I read were 1 to 4 and 9 to 14. So I'll do a bit of jumping throughout this reading back and forth.
Great, thank you, Nicole.
That was, I'm someone who has dabbled in erasure a bit and kind of backed away from it because I felt like, well, one, just plainly I'm not very good at it, but also because there are ways for me where I'm sitting with text that displeases me. Anytime I was brought to Erasure, I was brought to it because I was displeased with the current conditions of a text or the present conditions of a text, and I wanted to reformat them. But I found myself so steeped in rage or frustration. And so I think like Erasure is the work of an Erasure poem is like a brilliant craft point. But I also think, and I don't know if Nicole, you had this experience. I also think it's a real emotional experience and a way to kind of temper our emotions around existing language that is unbearable or untenable in some way. And so, yeah, that was really great to hear. For the pieces, I wrote for this project, they were all kind of, I started to think a lot about police and how I first encountered police. And it was, I lived in a neighborhood where like the cops fucked with everyone, but it was also such a neighborhood that sometimes the police were too afraid to come into it. And so my most high contact engagement with police was on TV through shows like New York Undercover or The Wire or movies like New Jack City, where the priority was making police officers appear cool, right? Or like, particularly when you get these like New York cop shows, they're kind of like, we're beyond sympathy even, and we're at a point where it's like the cops are cool and aspirational. And so I wrote a series of poems that all have the same title that kind of breaks down my engagement with that media when I was young and how I have divested from it now, perhaps. And this piece is about Carver from The Wire. And there's a scene in the notorious Carver scene in The Wire is where he jumps on top of a car. It's like early, I think it's maybe season 1. He jumps on top of a car and like yells some threats at the dope boys who are hiding in the buildings. And I remember seeing that for the first time, being like, he's the cool one. I was young, so it's not like it was yesterday, but and you're like, well, he's the cool one. Like, look at the way he's decked out and all this shit. And now when I watched it, I went back to watch that scene to like work on this project, and I was like kind of horrified by not only the presentation of Carver, but also the language he was hurling into the atmosphere. So all the TV shows are about cops. You can always tell which police officer is supposed to be the cool one by the way the cigarette dangles between their cracked fingers, or by the way the cigarette smoke dances around a diamond ring, or by the platinum chain their badge swings from, by the whip they push through the back alleys they grew up on. You can tell the cool cop by how they know the older brothers of the dope boys and don't drop government names when yelling out of a tinted window, how they keep the elbow angled just right when shooting ball, the way coaches who circled the hood taught them on a court lined with needles and broken glass. You can tell the cool cop by the way they eyeball the stash, don't even need to keep a scale, say fuck the interrogation. There is no truth that doesn't reflect itself in blood. Can tell by the song that plays when they put the siren on top of the Benz, something you maybe heard sliding around along the leather back seat of an OG's ride. Know the exact way to order a sandwich at the corner spot and who to ask for the dirt. It is so seductive to blur the line between beloved and executioner, not afraid to take the dirty money as long as street niggas don't forget who ain't doing a bid behind a stray bullet. And I admit, back in the day, I loved the moment Carver leapt atop the Nissan Sentra in his black kicks and baggy jeans and offered a sermon of threats to the boys hiding somewhere in the concrete forest, the way his mouth undressed the slang and its familiar comforts when he yelled, "You do not get to win, we do."
Wow.
Or I know that scene well. I know that series, the show well. This is dope. Thank you, Diana. I want to echo Nicole's thank you to the Poetry Center, to Tyler, to Dwayne. And this opportunity to get to read with these two people. Nicole and I go back a little ways. And Hanif is one of the most generous dudes I know. When Diana was reading the bio and she mentioned the essay collection, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. And the first time I met Hanif was actually at AWP, and I was literally on my way to the book fair to purchase that book, and we ran into each other. And I remember telling you, Hanif, that I'm about to go get your book. And Hanif, you guys just pulled the book out of his bag and just handed it to me. And I was like, here you go. And that was special. That was a special moment. You know, you don't really get that kind of vibe at AWP often, and you know, so it was just a magical moment, and I'm glad to have built a friendship with you, and I'm glad that we had this time together to read. I'm actually going to change directions a little bit. I was going to read something from the project, and I'll come back to it maybe and say some words about it, but I wanted to read something to kind of piggyback off Hanif's poem. You know, I don't pretend to be an expert at all on the carceral state, but I do know that it begins long before prison, right?
Mhm.
And Hanif's poem about the police and our interaction and perception of the police, I think, is right on point, because for a lot of us, that's our first interaction with the law, but also law, yeah? And it really sets a precedence, I think, for the way we process that and live through that. And the way that it sets up this adversarial relationship between the community and the people policing the community, it's set early on, right? And then everything we do is kind of, you know, a reaction to that, for better or worse. And yeah, in my first book, I wrote a poem called Into the Dragon. Into the Dragon was the name of a Bruce Lee movie, as many people watching will know. In that movie, the most compelling character, most compelling actor for me and a lot of my peers was not Bruce Lee, but Jim Kelly. Jim Kelly in the 70s, before, you know, we had, you know, positive filmmakers putting positive images on the screen like Lee Daniels and Tyler Perry and, you know, people like that. We were kind of left to our own devices. And one of the first people we had to look to was Jim Kelly. In this film, there's a scene early on where he's either walking down the street or driving down the street and is accosted by some police officers. And I think the police officers are on the take from this mob boss or something. And they go to jack Jim Kelly up, but Jim Kelly is a martial artist and it's a movie. So he beats all their asses, jumps in the police car and drives off. And I remember being at the movies with my father and watching that scene and being really affected by it. So that was one of the first images that I saw of resistance. And that's where the poem starts. It starts in the movie theater in 1976. For me, the movie starts with a Black man leaping into an orbit of badges, tiny moons catching the sheen of his perfect Black afro, arc kicks, karate chops, and 30 cops on their backs. It starts with the swagger, the cool lean into the leather front seat of the black and white he takes off in, deep hallelujahs of moviegoers drowning out the wah-wah guitar, salt and butter high fives, right on, brother. And daddy, glowing so bright, he can light the screen all by himself. This is how it goes down. Friday night, and my father drives us home from the late show. Two heroes Cadillacing across King Boulevard. In the car's dark cab, we jab and clutch Jim Kelly and Bruce Lee with popcorn breath and almost miss the lights flashing in the cracked side mirror. I know what's under the seat, but when the uniforms approach from the rear quarter panel, when the fat one leans so far into my father's window, I can smell his long day's work. When my father, this John Henry of a man, hides his hammer, doesn't buck, tucks away his baritone, license and registration, shaking as if showing a bathroom pass to a grade school principal. I learned the difference between cinema and city, between the movie house cheers of old men and the silence that gets us home.
Thank you so much for that, John. And thank you also for talking a little bit of a very known sort of fact, but it's sort of overlooked that, the incarceration and sort of like that pipeline starts sometimes at birth. Sometimes starts at birth in the neighborhood. So it's not just sort of like the first engagement with law enforcement when someone is arrested. It's kind of like this thing that's been going on for a long time. So thank you for sharing that poem. All right, and Nicole, would you like to share something?
Happy to. Thank you for that, John. You know, that's one of my favorite poems of yours. And we do go back from 10 minutes ago in the kitchen. So good to see you again. Good to see you again. And of course, dear Hanif, whose generosity is exactly as John described. I just want to thank you all again for having me be a part of this project. I've had dear friends and family members incarcerated, and having to go through that in a different way with those incarcerated folks was difficult, and their return home equally so. So I appreciate being part of this and being able to share some of this. Okay, some poems. I'm gonna read a couple more excerpts, this time pages 22 to 29 and 30 to 34. There, against the eavesdrop of night, clear as a refrain, they were young, running after mercy. Its tail lights long gone, neither interfering nor resisting. Profane, really. Consider the severity flight imposes on a deer, instances in which the animal, out of nowhere, appears to flee 2 or 3 seconds too late, but does so only because of a design oversight assigned to this particular brand of beast. We are the same fleeing things all, evidenced for men by the closing door behind us. My point is, I decided for the second time to force myself to stand in place. A telltale sign that the conditions under which I had been running were breaking the skin, or worse, training the mind. Who among us is stunned by how fast rain can pour from the sky? Stunned by how the sky, clear at first, corrects itself, as if to say, I mean this, not that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I wanted to make sure that you had come to an organic pause. Thank you for also sharing a little bit about the what it meant to be invited. I think that one of the things that another one of our partners, Kima Jones, can't forget Kima, Kima and Dwayne, Tyler, we've all spoken a lot about, making space for both writers who were incarcerated, writers who have been directly impacted, but also all of the adjacent harm and trauma that comes with having family members who have gone through that experience. And the effect of that is a trickle down effect, and it affects everyone. And it was important for us to bring people into the conversation from all different perspectives who maybe have never had an interaction with, law enforcement, because the more people that we have speaking about it, the more it becomes all of our problem. right? It doesn't become just the people who are away. So I'm just, thank you for saying that, because that's a good just sort of thought to kind of keep in mind as we continue to move forward with the project.
I feel like yeah, my first time around, I got so excited. I didn't, but I expressed perhaps appropriate gratitude to the center and to you, Diana, and to everyone involved, and to Dwayne, and to Tyler, who is who I'm obligated to mention is an Ohioan.
Yeah, yes, he is a very proud one too.
Yeah, he's from like, I mean, he's not like really from Columbus, but he might as well be. He's like 30 minutes away. And to John and Nicole, who are, you know, two of my favorite poets. And it's also, I was thinking The Wire, but really I have in this series of poems I wrote about Ferguson. I was in 2014, I was in Ferguson twice for the uprisings. And, you know, as someone who much of my life has been engaged with kind of like on the ground action here at home in Columbus, I still will say that, you know, like for being in Ferguson, quote unquote, on the ground during that time was just an immensely terrifying experience. And I think when I look at this summer and the landscape of this summer nationally, but also locally where I was at, I do think some of the ways that the people have learned to take care of each other through these processes of uprising and very much present in the streets type of resistance, those were lessons that began for a new era, perhaps in Ferguson, but I think the toll is the toll and the ache that came with those lessons, I think, is immense. And so the second time I was there, of course, was after Darren Wilson's acquittal, and there was a notorious photo of, it was around Thanksgiving, and there's a notorious photo of the season's greeting sign hanging in the street while there's like tear gas and protesters running. And so this poem's a little bit about that time for me. All the TV shows are about cops. The psychic with the glowing windows next to the pizza shop tells me the thing about the end of the world is that it already happened before you were born. So I wander through the poisoned leaves of the forest. From my bare cupped hands, I drink from the brown river that divides downtown Columbus between the haves and the have-nots. It is easy to understand why America so adored the photo of tear gas winding its way around season's greetings hanging over a street in Ferguson, packed with cops in riot gear, somewhere beyond the baton severing of winter's chill and the glass being kissed into webs. One might be able to imagine a family placing boxes underneath a tree, wearing matching sweaters and watching another movie about ghosts. America loves its contrasts, but never its history. The blades that feast their way through the tree's bark remember only the sweetness of collapse, not the joyful gathering, not the ornaments hand-painted from someone who survived the riot generations before the one howling at these doorsteps. Greetings to this new season of the bandana in the back pocket and then swinging from a once familiar face. I breathe in the scent of my own living to avoid the cars on fire, the way the eyes burn themselves shut. A seasonal greeting to the way my heart ghosts its own rhythm when I text, I love you, please tell me you're safe, and hear nothing back in the time it takes for a person to be pulled from a car's open window, to the worry that parks itself beneath the skin of my palms. My homie ran for a fence with a stolen cell phone in his pocket and didn't hear the cop yelling before he heard the gun go off, or maybe there was no yelling at all. Witnesses say one sound can be swallowed by a louder, more violent ruckus. Somewhere beyond, a family places a box underneath a tree and begins to shovel the already ended earth, wondering if this is all the apocalypse has to offer. Thanks.
Wow.
Wow, that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna kind of mess the order of things up a little bit and read a longer poem that's so long that it may cause me to have to relinquish my go on the last round. This is from the project. So what I did with the project is Following the lead of Fernando Pessoa, I wanted to write a series of poems under a heteronym. It's not exactly a persona, but it's close in that I think Pessoa's heteronyms were different versions of himself. And this heteronym that I wrote under is called Johnny Shakespeare. And what he's doing is he's actually writing in a form called the toast for the most part. And the toast, as some of you may know, is a form of oral poetry that has a long history, but it finds a good part of its generative portion in the carceral system. A lot of toasts were oral poems that incarcerated men would make up on the spot or compose in their head and then share them with each other and use those to pass the time. Some of the toasts you might know from Ether's Night poems. He has a standard, I Sing of Shine, Dark Prophecy. Shine is actually a character who shows up in a lot of these toasts. Staggerly is another. Signifying Monkey is one. You might know those from Dolomite and Oscar Brown Jr. Right? So what I was doing in these was, writing through the heteronym, using a form that was created in prison. And this is funny, when I was working on this, I've been working on this for a while, and kind of retroactively made it a heteronym poem. I noticed that there are certain themes that pop up throughout a lot of my work, and you guys might see some similarities between the first poem I read and this one. But again, it has to do with that image back in the day of Jim Kelly, I think, rebelling against the police state. This is a poem, it's kind of a double persona thing. So it's a persona poem written in the voice of Stagger Lee by my heteronym, Johnny Shakespeare, who is the creation of the artist currently known as John Murillo. Right, so saw that going on, and I think that's all you need to know. It's long, so settle in. It's called the Ballad. Oh, Stagger Lee. So who is Stagger Lee? Stagger Lee is a character that shows up in a lot of these toasts. Now, the toasts are often problematic, right, because they're written or composed by typically young men with a very hyper masculine sensibility. So a lot of the toasts have to do with sexual prowess, with martial skills, whether it be knuckle skills or gun skills, right? So there's a lot of that in there. I try to expand this and maybe change that a little bit. I don't want to say too much about that and give it away, but it starts out in the same place and that's where it goes. So Stagger Lee is the prototypical bad nigger. This is, he's the man all the men want to be and all the women want to be with, the best dancer, the best fighter, all these things built up into one. Kind of a caricature, if you will, but one that was useful. So in the prison system, when a lot of these men felt like they were being emasculated and dehumanized, they could tell these stories about this mythical character and feel somehow upheld. The Ballad of Stagger Lee, or variation on the theme by Sterling A. Brown with a slight nod to Etheridge Knight. 1. Hear ye, pull up a chair and sit still. I got bubblegum and time and a story to tell. Well, I'm fresh out of gum and have some place I gotta be, but listen close, I'll be quick about my main man, Stagger Lee. So it's not really a persona poem. Now, once upon a midnight, Stagger Lee left the house of Harlem's finest, grinning cat with the proverbial mouse. You don't believe it, but pimpin' Stag for once thought he might put a ring on the last woman he bedded that night. He thought about her smile, thought about her lips, thought about her wide West African hips. Stag stopped to light a square, thinking about her hair, and heard, "Nigga, drop that cig and get your hands in the air." The king was interrupted, ruminating about his queen, by 6 cops in one car, pointing guns and looking mean. They had blue guns, black guns, long guns, short guns, all sorts of guns, don't show up in the report guns. Stagger Lee stood steady in the street lamp glow, blowing smoke O's and leaned against the pole. He thought to himself, these motherfuckers must got me confused for an unarmed black man. Trust. I'm Stagger fucking Lee with the wild foe about to send 6 rockets through these pigs' car door. Just then a cop shouted, "Nigger, can't you hear?" Stag said, "No, sir, I can't. Could you come a little nearer?" A crowd started forming, coming closer to see. One woman whispered, "Do they know they fucking with Stagger Lee?" The wrinkled one used to keeping blacks under boot, used to smacking around and shaking down for loot. Stepped his old ass out the car, he did, his old bones creaking. Then he started speaking. "Boy, you must don't recognize the badges in the car. You must not see the gats. You know who we are? You know where you at? When we say stick your hands up, you stick them." Another cop said, "Let's beat them and kick them." The other 4 cops hopped out the funky ride, slid their pistols into holsters, pulling whackers from their side. One shouted, "Show ID." One hollered, "Hands in the air." One bellowed, "Butt on the ground." One stammered, "Stand right there." A short, fat cop reached for his waist to get some mace. Stag took a drag, then flicked his cig in his face. The old cop faltered, but a rookie felt bold, thought he might slide up and try that old chokehold. Wannabe Marine, still on that few good men hype, Stag cut a thin stripe straight across his windpipe. More people gathered, those on parole scattered, some carried banners reading Black Lives Matter. YouTubers took video, hippies chanted peace, a few with fresh welts saying "fuck the police." Pop, 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 rat-a-tat in the air. "Calling all cars, we need help over here. We got a nigger cornered far as we can see." Dispatch asked, "Then what's the problem?" Cop said, "His name is Stagger Lee." 2. Helicopter lights showered millions of cops, armored trucks, snipers perched on tenement tops. They shut down the block, barricades and yellow tape. There seemed to be no way Stag could make his escape. Stagger Lee hunkered down behind the brick wall with his cell phone dying and nobody to call. In his coat, he had a flask, Desert Eagle, a few clips, half pack of ports. One he flipped to his lips. The standoff lasted well past the break of dawn. The police chief reached for the captain's megaphone, said, "Stagger Lee, I'm tired and my patience is thin. You got 10 seconds, nigger, to bring your black ass in." Stag took a swig from his flask of gin and began to think what this country asks of men. Stand here, go there, don't be too big or too black. He thought about the water hoses, police dog attacks. He thought about Breonna Taylor, Emmett Till, Oscar Grant at Fruitvale, Trayvon and Sean Bell, Sandra Bland, Rekia Boyd, George Floyd and Rodney King, Freddie Gray, Shelley Frey, long list, and that's the thing. Stagger Lee knew they had no plans to let him walk. He knew they had him measured for the bags and chalk. Even innocent folk couldn't breathe and walk free. He thought, let alone me, gangsta ass Stagger Lee. He took another swig, dragged on his cig, then popped a shot over the top of the wall and the boss cop dropped. Bedlam and panic as the pigs ran frantic, Stag kept blasting on some one-man gang shit. He unloaded, swore, then reloaded his 44, lit up 10 more and the rest hit the floor. Police pissed their pants up and down the boulevard. SWAT team begged the mayor, call the National Guard. Days flew past, tear gas, and now tanks. To get Stagger Lee, the city broke the bank. The president too sent special forces and SEALs. And when asked, the Pope said, by God, that nigga's just too real. Still, a Desert E clip only holds but so much, and the soldiers wouldn't get close enough to touch. Then the assistant to the assistant pulled the mayor aside and said, if you don't want him alive, think Philly in '85. Y'all can Google that if you don't know what happened in Philly in '85. You don't mean Eureka, cried the mayor, and before long a lone drone sliced the air, circled wide while the cops tried to clear the block, then hovered, a hummingbird with the missiles caught. The mayor gave the gladiator sign, thumbs down. The drone set its sights, then exploded mid-flight. Duck, the mayor screamed, then screamed, run for cover. Stagger Lee looked up and saw his #1 lover. On a rooftop, leather bodysuit, a bazooka, fro blown in the wind. Stag said, oh, sookie, sookie. And she wasn't alone. She brought the Panther Brigade, singing, get up, stand up. Stag knew he had it made. She rode the zip line in smooth to save the day. Her name was Nikki Black from down the Popka way. I'll say really quickly, I've since found out that there's a poet named Nikki Black. She is not the inspiration for this. There's another Nikki from Apopka who's the inspiration for this. 3. Lottie Dottie, boy, Nikki Black sure had a body. The hottie said, get ready, then tossed Stag a shotty. 12 gauge sawed off pistol grip, hold this. Then she winked and blew Stag Lee a gold tooth kiss. Now I said I'd be quick, but here's where it all gets good. Nikki Black had gathered up all the boys in the hood. Homegirls with hand grenades, put pistoleros in place. A santero sang and killed a couple goats just in case. They lit Pirellis on fire at each end of the street, bottled gaseous rags flung at riot cops' feet. Stag said, I can last at least a dozen years, dozen days. That's when the president balked, said he had golf to play. Ronald K. Chump left the mayor out to dry with his bullets run low and 2 tears in each eye. The mayor cried, Mr. President, motherfucker, can't you see? I can't do it alone. That's that nigga Stagger Lee. Then Chump said, you're fired, bigly, and I quit. Then signaled for his limo with the spoiler kit. And while the president bickered with the mayor and cops, one rebel snuck Stag and Nick a bag of props. Nikki Black threw on a beard, tuxedo and top hat. Stag and drag, dress and wig, sashayed away out the back. Stag chloroformed the driver, homies held down the goons. Nikki Black phoned the prez and said the car would come soon. Chump saw the red bob wig and sequins on Stag's dress, then hopped his ass right in and started groping for breasts. He reached high and low to grab as much as he could and turned snow when Stag said, hey, yo, partner, what's good? Chump had the bass in his face, a big old yam in his hand, some chili chrome to his dome, but still could not understand. So Stag Lee cleared his throat, torn it down in a rant, but Nikki Black shot the prez and was like, I'm sorry, I can't. They left the limo running with his presidential plates. Nick said, we can still catch Shaft and Cheryl's is open late. And by the time they found the limo with the Chump in the trunk, Stag and Nick were back in Harlem, hugged up and half drunk.
Wow. Johnny Shakespeare.
That boy got some skills.
Yeah, no, I love that. You know, it's very theatrical. It was almost like a video, like I could see, it's just very cinematic, the way that it's sort of drawn out, almost like a musical. But I really love that, and I appreciate you sharing that. I know that there was some question of whether you should share it, but I'm glad that you did. It's a badass poem.
Thank you, thank you. I mean, Johnny Shakespeare thanks you.
All right, we're gonna keep going with poetry and chat about the process. So I think we have Nicole, if you'd like to share, and then we'll do another round.
Thank you, John. You know I love that poem. I'm the Nikki Black from Apopka way.
I knew it. I was like, I don't know. Like, am I okay if I infer this? I was like, seems like it.
It's me. I want to go back to what Hanif was saying earlier about the process of erasure and wanting to revise a document that felt like it was wanting revision. And I think I feel and felt similarly in revising the Ferguson Report, in that I wanted to revise a present tense that felt just hard to be in. And so wanting to revise a present and a past, you know, outcomes that have all too often been the death of many of us. I set out to erase this with, hopefully, I'm not done yet, hopefully a an ending that is a revision to all the endings we've seen in these types of reports. And so hopefully life will be at the end of this instead of death. So I'm going to end with a short excerpt from the Ferguson Report and Erasure, and this is pages 5 to 8. Officials found our conduct caused official harm. Officials found us at home in the high grass of relative safety, under a God elected by men. We are in contempt, he said. We have violated the violations, he said, at which point we began to set in concert with the sun. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. It's beautiful work. Redaction or erasures, people are calling them different things. Found poems. I think it's challenging, right? It's challenging to do them and to kind of create a new meaning from something that is already kind of set. And then the other thing is I also think the layer of sort of writing on behalf of some very bad things that are occurring, that's another tension, right? And where do you take that to? And do you tease out what is actually there in those documents, or do you try and circumvent the documents? And Hanif mentioned this, and I think everyone has mentioned the word resistance. And I think that's what happens a lot in like the found poems and the redactions. There's just so much resistance there. And I just think that you did a beautiful work with that. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, Diana. Thank you.
Gorgeous work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, and thank you, John. I love that. I love that poem a lot. And I love the, I'm working on a big project that I can't talk too much about, but I'm working on a big project on Stagger Lee right now. And the history of Stagger Lee toasts and just kind of like world building around the Stagger Lee actual story. And so what a great convergence. I'm gonna close by reading a poem that's not mine, if that's cool.
Absolutely.
It was just Arthur Lee's birthday, Arthur Lee from the band Love. And he is a musician, a Black musician who lost time in his late career to incarceration. And there are many Black musicians who have lost time to incarceration. Billie Holiday, the list is pretty long. And in some cases, like in the case of Arthur Lee, that has kind of altered their trajectory of living, as it did for Eddie Hazel, who I think about Eddie Hazel all the time, because I think Eddie Hazel has performed, one of the, Maggot Brain is one of the greatest pieces of music ever performed by a human playing an instrument. But shortly after that, his career never flourished in the way that it could have. He was jailed in 1973. He had disputes with Parliament Funkadelic over like distribution of payments in the early 70s. And, he kind of never got on track in the way that someone of his immense talent might have. And I think about, when I didn't start writing poems till like 2011. And one of the first poems I ever read, like in my life, when I was coming up, teachers weren't teaching living poets or much poetry at all in school. So one of the first poems I read by a living poet was the poem Maggot Brain by Adrian Matika. And it was the first poem I read where I was like, oh shit, like I can do, because my whole thing was like, well, I was a music critic. So I was like, why would I write poems? Like I just want to write about musicians. I just want to write about like music shit. And I read Maggot Brain and I was like, oh, this is it. Like I can do this, And I think he does a good job of capturing, the story behind Maggot Brain that people remember and talk about a lot is George Clinton telling Eddie Hazel, play like your mama died, play like your mama just died. But the full quote is much more interesting, because what he was actually asking him to do was consider a world where someone who has loved him all his life is no longer present, and he has to take measure of everything happening in the world and find a way to carry on. Like, to me, that's more thoughtful than just play like your mama died, but I get that. you know, the soundbite has to be the soundbite. I know how music mythology has its soundbite, so it's got to be. But I wanted to read Maggot Brain by Adrian Matika because I think it does such a good job of humanizing Eddie Hazel in the full life he lived. So this is Maggot Brain for Eddie Hazel by Adrian Matika. Jawbone used for a washboard, scrape of knuckles, whelped skin from washing bumps, from washing needles or mosquitoes or fish scale rails, maggot brain, teeth stickling a long dream, click of brain, click of mousetrap on the four-fingered way down, click. That's what happens when George Clinton says, play like your mama just died. Everything else becomes a handful of stomach aches, maggot brain. The cavity of a jail cell smells like everything a man wants gone, not funky, but nasty. Not nasty because no one's trying to shank you in the shower. It's just a big timeout with bologna sandwiches and bad fruit. Jail is a mouthful of twitches and aches, maggot brain. Ain't you supposed to rise to the top of this mess like some triplicated heart? Ain't that extra chamber below the frets in charge of breathing? I hear that thing wheezing like a breath still trying to breathe. Maggot brain, somebody, someplace is losing a mama right now. Go maggot brain, go maggot brain.
Wow.
Thanks.
Thank you, honey, for reading that poem by Adrian Matika. Adrian's actually going to be on our podcast, our season 3 upcoming podcast that we're maybe season 4. I think it's season 4. So we're a big fan of his work, and he's been at the Poetry Center too. So thank you for sort of sharing that poem. It's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a big, I mean, Adrian knows this, but I'm a big, his work is so important to me. I'm such a big fan. I'm excited for the new thing.
Yeah, for sure. All right, John, do you want to close us out with a final poem? And then I may have one last question for all of you before we close the circle.
It sounds good. Well, because I took up so much time with my own poem, and because Hanif has opened the door and gave me permission to do this, I will end, but I'll end with some OPP. I'll end with a poem by Etheridge Knight.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when we think of prison and poetry, you know, his name has to be in the conversation. In many ways, he's the patron saint to a lot of us, but, you know, but a lot of the people who are doing this kind of work and thinking about these things. So I'm going to read a poem of his called For Freckle-Faced Gerald. Now you take old Rufus. He beat drums, was free and funky under the arms, fucked white girls, jumped off a bridge, and thought nothing of the sacrilege. He copped out, and he was over 21. Take Gerald. 16 years, hadn't even done a good job on his voice. He didn't even know how to talk tough or how to hide the glow of life before he was thrown in as pig meat for the buzzards to eat. Gerald, who had no memory or hope of copper hot lips or firm upthrusting thighs to reinforce his flow, let tall walls and buzzards change the course of his river from south to north. No safety in numbers, like back on the block. 2's aplenty. 3, definitely not. 4, you're all Muslims. 5, you were planning a race riot. Plus, Gerald could never quite win with his precise speech and innocent grin, the trust and fists of the young black cats. Gerald, sun-kissed 10,000 times on the nose and cheeks, didn't stand a chance, didn't even know that the loss of his balls had been plotted years in advance by wiser and bigger buzzards than those who now hover above his track and at night light upon his back.
Thank you, John. That was beautiful. Etheridge Knight is also sort of like one of those poets that I think really opened personally my eyes as a poet to like, oh, these are all the people that I know in my neighborhood, and you can write about them, and that you could write about prison, and you could do it in a way where it's not, it doesn't become like a spectacle. Right. It's like a real story, a real human story, like Absolutely. The humanization what happens. I think we're gonna go ahead and close for tonight there. And I just want to thank everyone who is tuning in to watch this. And I want to thank the poets for being so present, not only in the creation of the work, but also in the reading of the work and their attention to, the issue of the carceral state. So thank you, everyone.